Hey folks, today I want to talk to you a little bit about editing your black and white photos. What is going to make your black and white photos stand out amongst the sea of other black and white photos. Now, if you head over to my Instagram and you check that out and you think, dang, those are some pretty nice black and white edits. Well, that's because I think that if I have any strength in editing photography, it's probably through black and white. And today I'm going to share with you some of the tricks and tips and all those things that help me edit my photos and that I basically apply to every black and white photo that I edit. I'm also going to leave you with my personal preset that I apply to every image. Probably every image for the past 2 years, I've applied the same preset, made minor adjustments. Some of them are just ready to go straight off the bat. So I'm going to leave that in the description for you. You can go and grab that for free also. Part of the reason I wanted to make this video today is not only just to be a little bit helpful in general, but also I'm a huge fan of black and white and I keep seeing the same mistakes just commonly used over and over. And one of those things that I see often is something I like to call gray, and gray. And by that I mean people use dark gray, mid-range gray, and light gray, but it's not called gray and gray, it's called black and white. So one of the things I'm going to teach you today is how to make your blacks black and not just look black, but actual black, and something very similar with the lights, so that you end up with a high contrasty black and white image that will stand out in the bunch. So without further ado, let's head on over to Lightroom. Now it could be any editing software of your choice, but today we're going to be using Lightroom. So if you're also using Lightroom, it'd be a bit easier to follow. We're going to be working with this photo here that I shot on the Paris Metro. This photo, fully edited of course, is available for a print on my website at macintoshphoto.com. You should definitely go check that out because there's some really cool stuff there, including t-shirts for those who love photography. Christmas is coming. Go get something nice for somebody or for yourself. So let's get into it. First things first, our photo is in color. We want to change that. And by doing that, I'm going to select one of the many profiles. I use Adobe Monochrome. I've been using it, well, forever now. It's part of my preset. There is many to choose from. Their cameras have their own profiles, etc. The only thing that I would say is use one that has blacks. There are ones with pushed blacks or crushed blacks, however you want to call it. If you don't know what that means, I'll explain it soon, but don't use one of those. Moving forward, for those who don't know, you can actually still adjust the white balance on a black and white image. I tend not to do that. It just seems to change sort of the exposure. These are the numbers that I've been using on the preset forever. I think it's just a good mid-range thing. I just stick with that. We're going to make the adjustments anyways. Don't really need to worry about the white balance in our black and white image. Next up, the exposure, pretty obvious one. I tend to err on the slightly darker side when I edit. And so I know for a fact this image, I'm going to set it to minus 0.55. But yeah, this is something that's going to be very specific to your image. So you choose what works for you. Go slightly on the darker side as a recommendation. Next up is the contrast. Contrast is something that I find is very important for our black and white image, and we're going to introduce that in multiple ways. But with this slider, I just like to put it up somewhere around 20 or 30. I'm going to put it up to 30 for this image. I like a good punchy contrast. So that's what we're going to do. Now, highlights. I don't like highlights in digital images. I don't know what it is, but I usually remove all of them. I'm going to bring back a lot of the whites. I don't know if that's frowned upon. It's something I've always done. I like the way my black and whites look, so I continue to do it. I'm going to minus these around 90. Depending on the image, I would minus them usually around minus 60 to minus 90, somewhere around there. If it's a very bright image or I want a high key image, and I can still sort of sustain a lot of the information by not going too crazy, it might be around minus 30, but very rarely. Mostly, I'm almost removing all of them. Shadows is a great place to introduce some contrast that's not too crazy. I want to go around minus 30 for this image, but with shadows, I find that because you're affecting more of the middle of the range, I find it's just a smoother way to get to your contrast. I'm not sure if this is going to translate very well in how I'm saying it, but there is a point where using the black slider or using the contrast slider, things get a little too crunchy. And I don't know if that's just because it's being over-processed at the time and even the raw file starts to kind of break down. It's a total eye thing, and it's just something I've developed over time. I can tell when that's been affected too heavily, and that's not a good thing. Subtlety is usually the key, with the exception of some contrast in our black and white images. Now, whites is where I'm going to start to bring back some of the exposure. So obviously the image looks a little bit dark, at this point. I'm usually going actually pretty high. So I'm usually going around 60 or 70 for my images, but I really want to get that white without clipping it too much. Now, you're going to get some clipping probably in things like these lights, for example. And if we hover over these arrows up here, you'll actually see that. And there's an important part that we want to use. But as long as there's not too much of that, and in things like sunlight reflecting off something metal, you're going to get it anyways. You could go through and retouch it all out. I wouldn't worry about it too much. And here we're also going to add a little bit extra contrast, because to my eye, it still looks a little bit gray. Even in these darker areas, here, and here, it still looks a little bit gray. So we want to punch that down a little bit. We're going to put -20 on the blacks. So now we're starting to get our basic photograph look that we're going for. Now we're still going to make a few more adjustments here, but the overall tone of it, the overall contrast is starting to set in. And this is where I start to look at a few different things. So one of the things that I'll do first is I'll switch the background color back and forth between black and white, because when we're editing, for example, with a black background, these whites will look pretty white. But for example, when we switch it back to white, we'll actually see that they're still muted a little bit. You know, very, very, very light gray. And we want this pure white in comparison. And I think it's one thing that a lot of people could use. And this is because the same rule applies for the blacks also. You might think that this area looks very black, but in comparison to the pure black, then you get a proper picture of it. So it's something I recommend. I know there are other people who do edit in the gray, but to be honest, I find you're not solving either problem by doing that. So I would do that. On the other note, if your social media, whatever you use, has a white or a black background, which is very common, this is an easy way to get to see how your image would look on that social media. Now, the next thing I really want to check out after giving that an overall look is, again, hover over these arrows up on your histogram. One of the most important things that I find that I think people are lacking is that with my whites, I want to push them up as high as I can get them without too much clipping. And by too much, I mean almost none. Like I say, with these fluorescent lights that were on the top of the Metro, I don't think there's really any avoiding that. Like I say, I could go out and mask them all the way through, but there's so little there that I'm not bothered by it. And it's also why I turn my highlights down quite a lot and start to bring up the whites. I feel like there's just a smoother transition there, and I'm able to retain a lot more of the information. Now, I want to do the same again for the darks, and I want to hover over this little arrow. You can actually click them on if you want and really see where they are, and then go ahead and make adjustments. But for now, I just hover over. Now, the areas that are highlighted are black, and black. They're not what looks black, they are black. So what I aim for in my image, and depending on the photograph, of course, but is around about 10 to 30% complete black. I think that's one thing that, again, many people could introduce into their photographs. With digital photography, black is fine. It's also okay to lose some of the information as long as it's not the important information. Here we can see that in the here and down here towards this bottom corner and right corner, we have pure black. There's nothing there that our eyes really need. There's no information there that's super important. And actually by removing it, we're drawing a lot more focus into our main subject here. So it's something we can use, but like I said, it's going to give your image a full range of contrast. You've got black, you've got your grays, and then you've got your almost whites. And I mean almost as in try to push it up as far as you can get without clipping anything too crazy. So there we have it. There's a pretty good basic build. Moving down with digital photography, I don't know what it is, especially for street photography. Of course, if it's portraits or something like that, I tend to leave this. But I do tend to remove some of the clarity and the texture. I know some people might frown upon this. Why do you buy this expensive camera and these expensive lenses just to remove some of the detail? I like a film look. I like a more vintage look in some of my photos, especially with street photography. I don't want crazy clarity. And again, I think I'm removing some of the unnecessary details and just little minor imperfections and things like that might become distracting. Now with the tone curve, obviously we don't really need to play with the colors because that is just going to affect our overall image and basically not make it black and white anymore. But what I usually do here is just go through some little finer adjustments. This tool can be a little bit easier to make these, just smaller adjustments. Go through, fine tune your image completely, however you want it. yeah, and then just obviously checking on your histogram again, make sure you're not blowing anything out too crazy, but make whatever adjustments you want there. Most of it should already be done, so be gentle with it. Moving down, obviously the color mix, we don't need too much. However, there was one important slider I can often use on this, and that is usually the orange slider. Now it's also going to be a little bit affected by the yellow and the red, but our skin tones usually exist in the orange slider. So you can see that just by dragging it back and forth. So we're affecting our skin tones here, right? Now, every now and again, because we want this high contrast, a little bit on the lower exposed side image, we're going to lose a little bit of our detail in our subject. So sometimes what I'll do is just bump this up a little bit, and you can see what a difference that makes. How much focus we're just putting back onto our subject or subjects here. You know, even kind of getting a little bit of a highlight on this gentleman here too, and creating a little bit more like focused framing. But most importantly, our gentleman in the center is just getting that little bit more of exposure on the skin. You're not going to affect the whole image in a very crazy way. So yeah, something I like to bump up just a little bit. Of course, if you want to do it a little bit more and you wanted to put it up into the 20, I would also recommend just also bringing up either side of it a little bit also, something like that, just so you're not completely just affecting one color, but affect the colors around it too, because so then you'll get a little bit of a smoother gradient into those highlights. Color grading, we definitely don't need. Sharpening is to taste. So usually I just remove sharpening. Again, I don't like the digital sharpening that happens a lot in photographs that or in an editing process. Now, one thing I could recommend is later when we finally go and we add a radial gradient to our subject, is you could introduce just a touch of sharpening there. But one thing that I always say with sharpening is that if you're going to use it, be pretty gentle, and then most importantly, use this masking tool. Now, you might not really be able to see what the masking tool is affecting, but on a Mac, at least if you hold Alt, I'm sure there's a Windows version as well, you can add this mask. And basically the white lines that you see here are what's being sharpened. Now, everything that's in black is the sharpening is removed. So you can see if we bring it down, this is sharpening a lot of things, but we don't really want to be sharpening the detail that's in this hand here, for example. So if we start to bring it up, we start to minus a lot of it. And, you know, I usually would bring my masking almost right up to 100, 98, 99, something like that. And then, you know, you're just going to get the finer details, the edges of a few things that are in focus, they start to sharpen. For my taste, I usually just remove it. I don't need to worry about it. Denoise and noise reduction, stuff like that. For me, it's still not a perfect feature. I tend to find it softens the image too much. And I still feel like there's a digital element to it that I feel like is recognizable. So I just don't use it at all. The profile corrections and chromatic aberrations I usually use. I don't know why, but Lightroom doesn't really have great Fujifilm things. My lens isn't even on here, but I usually use it, and it just makes a little bit of a difference. You can see here, somehow just straightens the image up a little bit, takes away some of the natural vignetting and that sort of thing. I chuck it on for every image. I think either way is not that noticeable whether you used it or not, but transform, we don't need to worry about that, neither with the lens blur. Now, post-crop vignetting, vignetting, I don't know how to say that word. I don't use this too much, but if I did, and I could definitely in this image, I think it would help a touch. Again, I feel like it's just too obviously put. You can obviously do it, is it here? Yeah, like in the lens corrections, you can use a vignetting there, but I tend not to use it. And if I do, it would be like -2. So barely noticeable, but that's part of our editing process is subtlety. Like, don't overdo anything, you know, like as soon as I add in this -10, for me, I think it's just too obvious. It looks fake. It might not to you if you haven't done a ton of photo editing, but I think as you move on and do a lot more of it, it just, I don't know, somehow it doesn't look great. So that's kind of where I sit with that. You know, you want to make edits that you're proud of for a longer period of time, but of course, you know, make your mistakes and learn along the way too. Final is calibration. I don't know why, but in my preset, I have this green primary set to a -30, and then my blue primary, which is just out of screen recording there, is a +30 saturation. I don't know why. Maybe it was just set there by accident from a previous preset when I built it. but I'm gonna chuck it there because it was there. Now, obviously then we're at mostly at the end of our editing for this image. What I would then of course do is just go back up to this main panel here and just make a few final adjustments. Again, check everything over, make sure everything's to your taste. Now you'll start to notice like, okay, I could go, you know, little less on the exposure or a little more. So make those final adjustments right at the end. And really final thing that I tend to add is just an overlook at image and see, okay, this thing could use a little more punching up or that a little less. So, and one of the things that I could add at the end is a radial gradient. Now, again, subtlety is our key, right? So I just want to draw a little bit of an attention to our subject here and just into the skin tones. We did bring them up in the orange, so maybe it's not too necessary, but literally I would just bump it up like, you know, 0.10 on the scale here, just to get it that little bit. Again, I don't want it to be super obvious that we actually put that there. And it's also one of the other reasons I don't use the vignetting very often, is because if I put that one in there, and let's say on another image that was even bigger, we're kind of creating one anyways. You know, we're making the center of our image in this case a little bit more exposed so that the outer parts of the image are going to be less exposed. So we're kind of keeping a natural lens profile, so to speak, and yeah, just adding more of that exposure in another place. I think the other thing at this point that you can do, like I say, is when you select your radial gradient, if you really want to draw a little more attention to your subject, then you can go through and either add clarity, but to my taste, I might introduce a little bit more sharpening if you feel like it needs it. And so there we have it. I think our image today is looking pretty damn nice. Like I say, you can go check that out on the website, along with many other nice prints, including a lot of color ones. As I say, Christmas is coming up. These make really beautiful gifts. If you want to order, there's actually free shipping and no taxes and all that kind of thing. So no extra costs for a limited time. So go check those out. Let me know what you think of the edit. Is there something I could do better? Is there something that you think I'm doing completely wrong? Also, if you want to see more of these videos, maybe I could do something exactly like this, but for my color process, or then things like high key black and whites, or, you know, maybe you've got a black and white image that you really like and it's just far too much gray in there. It's not enough lighting dynamics. How I would go about saving an image like that and trying to introduce a little bit more contrast and punchiness in an image like that, because it happens to the best of us. Or then also drop one of your hot tips in the comments. There's still black and white edits that I see that I'm just like, damn, that looks so good. And I'm really curious how I can improve my own black and white. So if you're happy sharing, drop something in the comments and just compare it to what I've done today and let me know what I'm doing wrong, because some of you are pretty good at that. But otherwise, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you enjoyed the free preset. Go check it out on the website. And until next time, happy creating. Peace.